walk this through. So I'm going to be sharing my screen. And there we go. Okay. Great. Okay. So we've got, we did our, okay, so I'm going to review just a little bit because we've had a little bit of a glitch here. So we did our first reading. First, you always pray before you begin. Pre-pray, which we did. Then we do our first reading and we do it out loud. And we told you why, and we do it all together. Second reading is our paragraph titles. Okay. Which we already did our paragraph titles. And if and hopefully if you of course it's recorded, so you can go back and look at what we did for our paragraph titles when charter is fixed. And Paul is very quick on getting that. Okay. Then we already did our color coding, so we did that already. What we're going to talk about right now is the basic required information, or the BRI. And this is a separate document. You won't be doing it in SBS Charter. And each assignment has its own BRI there. And the basic required information, or BRI, is to help you get the historical context of what's going on. What was the situation that they were facing? What was the solution that the author was bringing to them? What's the worldview that they're living in? We talked a little bit about Philemon. Oh, I'm sorry, and Andrea, I should have told you to record. I apologize.
I started.
Okay, so but what's going on in the world at that time? We talked about the fact that Onesimus was probably a slave. One hint is because his name means useful. Slave names generally had something to do with generally what they did. He was supposed to be useful. That was his name. There's another letter that Paul writes, and his scribe is named Tertius, which means 5. I think it's 5. So his name just is a number. So those are hints. But in the Roman Empire at this time, there was slavery. 2/3 of the Roman Empire were slaves. And in the city of Rome itself, which was about roughly 500,000 people, they figured between 200,000 to 300,000 of those people living in the city of Rome were slaves. And there were different forms of slavery. There were the slaves that we think of that maybe worked in the galleys, that rowed the boats, or worked in the salt mines. And those slaves, they had a pretty rough life, and they generally didn't live more than 2 years as slaves. But then you had slaves that were like house slaves, which we think Onesimus was probably a house slave. And they were part of the family. They could live a very long life. And they generally had pretty good lives if they had good owners. And it seemed like Philemon was a pretty good slave owner. So slavery was just part of the culture. And how did they deal with it? Well, if you treat a slave like a brother, even if they're still a slave, are they? It's one of those things. So there's a handout in the portal that talks quite a bit about slavery in the Roman Empire. But that's where we do our BRI. There's the critical method, there's the historical method, there's the literary method, and then there's the survey method. And you go through each of those sets of questions, and by the time you're done with it, you should have a pretty good understanding of the world of the original reader and of the author. Now, it's called the basic required information because we don't want you to have all the information. The goal is that you don't spend more than 1.5 to 2 hours on your BRI. You shouldn't spend more than that on it. Because we don't, once you become a Bible school teacher, then you can study like crazy and you can spend 1 million hours on it. And but for this, you just want enough information to understand the worldview, the situation that's going on in that church, and the solution. Okay? And again, that's in the portal, and you'll be filling that out on your own because we don't have enough time in this time period, in this class, to cover that. So do we have questions about the BRI? Now it mentions your IBS in here. Just ignore that because you don't have one. So there you go. questions about the basic required information? Okay, now we're going to be